cleaning out my late mother's basement. I found a little boy chained to the wall calling me uncle. When he told me who his caretaker was, I almost lost my mind. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. The gravel driveway crunched under Stephen Merritt's work boots as he stepped out of his diesel truck. 21 years. That's how long it had been since he'd driven up this path to the decaying farmhouse that squatted among 20 acres of dry grass and silence outside Spokane. The white paint hung in long, weathered strips from the siding, and the front porch sagged where a support beam had rotted through. Stephen grabbed his toolbox from the truck bed and walked toward the house. His mother's funeral had been 4 days ago. He hadn't attended. The only reason he was here now was to settle June Merritt's estate, so he could sell this cursed place and never think about it again. The key still worked. Stephen pushed open the front door and was hit with the smell of dust, old cigarettes, and something medicinal that made his stomach turn. The living room looked frozen in time. His mother's threadbare recliner faced a television older than most people's cars. The coffee table was covered with pill bottles, crumpled tissues, and a stack of unpaid bills. Stephen picked up one of the prescription bottles. Oxycodone, prescribed to June Merritt 2 weeks before she died. He set it down harder than necessary and walked into the kitchen. Everything was exactly as he remembered, down to the yellow linoleum and the smell of grease that had soaked into the walls over decades. On the kitchen table sat his mother's black Bible, open to a page covered with angry handwriting in blue ink. Her name was written inside the front cover in the same harsh script. Property of June Merritt, God's faithful servant. Stephen slammed the Bible shut. His mother had been many things, but faithful wasn't one of them. He methodically checked each room. His old bedroom looked exactly as he'd left it the night he climbed out the window at 17 with $43 and nothing else. The narrow bed, the desk where he'd done homework by lamplight because his mother said electricity was too expensive for studying, the window that had been his escape route from this nightmare. Marlene's room was different. Someone had been using it recently. Fresh sheets on the bed, women's clothes hanging in the closet. His half-sister had promised to meet him here today to help sort through their mother's belongings. That was 3 hours ago. Stephen checked his phone. No missed calls. Typical Marlene. Making promises she had no intention of keeping, just like when they were kids. Stephen walked back downstairs and opened the refrigerator. Spoiled milk, expired insulin, and the remnants of whatever his mother had been eating in her final weeks. He grabbed a trash bag and started cleaning out the rot. The physical work felt good, concrete, and controllable. As he worked, Stephen's mind drifted to the last time he'd spoken to his mother. 5 years ago, when she'd had her first heart attack. Marlene had called him crying, begging him to visit. She's asking for you, Stephen. She wants to make things right. So Stephen had driven down from Seattle and sat in that sterile hospital room, listening to June Merritt's version of an apology. But his mother didn't apologize. She explained. She justified. She blamed his father, blamed the world, blamed everyone except herself. I did my best with what I had, she'd wheeze from her hospital bed. You were such a difficult child, Stephen. So angry all the time. I had to be strict. Strict. That's what she called locking him in the basement for forgetting to take out the trash. Strict was making him kneel on rice while she screamed Bible verses at him. Strict was telling him every day that he was worthless, that no one would ever love him, that he was lucky she didn't throw him out like his worthless father. Stephen had stood up from that hospital chair, looked his mother in the eye, and said the last words he'd ever speak to her. I hope you rot in hell. Now she was dead, and Stephen felt nothing. No grief, no relief. Just the familiar emptiness that had lived in his chest since childhood. The sound of an engine in the driveway interrupted his thoughts. Through the kitchen window, Stephen saw a police cruiser pulling up behind his truck. His stomach tightened until he recognized the driver. Nate Carroll, his old friend from high school, now wearing a deputy's uniform and carrying about 30 extra pounds. Nate had been one of the few people who knew what went on in the Merritt house, though Stephen had never told him the worst of it. Stephen opened the front door before Nate could knock. Well, I'll be damned, Nate said, grinning. Stephen Merritt. Heard you were back in town. Word travels fast. Your sister mentioned you might be coming around. Nate stepped inside and looked around the living room. I'm sorry about your mother, man. I know things were complicated. Complicated? Stephen almost laughed. Thanks. You want some coffee? I think there's instant somewhere. I'm good. Just wanted to check on you. Make sure everything was okay. Nate studied Stephen's face. You look good, though. Seattle treating you well. Can't complain. Work keeps me busy. Stephen had been a diesel mechanic for 15 years, fixing trucks and heavy equipment. Honest work that required his hands and not much talking. Perfect for someone who'd learned early that trusting people was a mistake. Marlene around? Supposed to be. Haven't seen her yet. Nate's expression shifted slightly. She's been taking real good care of your mother these past few years. Running some kind of daycare business too, helping families in town. Real good of her. Something in Nate's tone made Stephen look at him more carefully. Helping how? Well, watching kids for people who need it. Your mother wasn't easy to deal with, and Marlene had her own troubles, but she stepped up. What kind of troubles? Nate shifted uncomfortably. Nothing serious. Just, she's had a hard time with jobs, relationships. But taking care of your mother seemed to straighten her out. The old rotary phone in the kitchen rang, its shrill tone echoing through the house. Stephen let it ring. He had no interest in talking to whoever wanted to reach June Merritt. You sure you're okay here by yourself? Nate asked after the ringing stopped. This place brings back memories. I'm fine. Just want to get this done and get back to my life. Nate nodded, but Stephen could see doubt in his eyes. Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me. And Stephen? Try to go easy on Marlene when she shows up. She's been through a lot. After Nate left, Stephen stood in the empty living room trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Nate had always been too trusting, too willing to see good in people. But his comments about Marlene running a daycare didn't make sense. His sister had never liked children, had complained constantly about babysitting Stephen when they were kids. Stephen grabbed his toolbox and headed upstairs to start on his mother's bedroom. The sooner this was done, the sooner he could leave this place behind forever. Stephen was sorting through his mother's papers when he heard it. A soft scraping sound from somewhere below, like something being dragged across concrete. He paused in the bedroom doorway, listening. Old houses made plenty of noises, but this was different, rhythmic, deliberate. He set down the box of documents and walked downstairs. The sound seemed to be coming from the kitchen area, but when he stood still, everything was quiet. Stephen grabbed a beer from the cooler he'd brought and twisted off the cap. The warm cores was bitter, but it helped steady his nerves. He was losing his mind. That had to be it. Being back in this house was making him imagine things. The scraping came again. This time Stephen was certain. It was coming from below the kitchen floor. He knelt and pressed his ear to the old linoleum. There it was again, faint but unmistakable. Something was moving around down there. Stephen had lived in this house for 17 years and been in the basement hundreds of times. His mother had sent him down there to get canned goods, check the furnace, hide when she was entertaining men she didn't want him to meet. It was just a concrete box with exposed ceiling joists and a dirt floor in one corner. Nothing mysterious about it. But that scraping sound was definitely coming from below. The basement door was behind the kitchen, the same narrow wooden door with chipped paint that Stephen remembered. His mother had always kept it locked, claiming the stairs were dangerous. Stephen had picked that lock when he was 12 and explored every inch of the basement. Nothing but cobwebs and his mother's collection of romance novels hidden behind the water heater. The door was unlocked now. Stephen flipped the light switch and heard the familiar buzz of the fluorescent bulb fighting to life. He walked down the wooden steps slowly, listening for the sound. The basement looked exactly as he remembered. Concrete walls painted white, the old furnace in one corner, metal shelving along one wall stocked with canned goods and cleaning supplies. But there were boxes of diapers and baby formula too, which was strange. Why would his mother need baby supplies? Stephen was about to head back upstairs when he noticed something off about the far wall. The concrete didn't quite match the rest of the basement. It was newer, cleaner, with a barely visible seam running from floor to ceiling. He walked over and ran his hand along the seam. Someone had built a wall here, sectioning off part of the basement. But why? The scraping sound came again, and this time Stephen was sure it was coming from behind that wall. His heart started beating faster. Stephen found his mother's old toolbox on a shelf and grabbed a crowbar. The mortar was softer than expected, crumbling as he worked the crowbar into the seam. Whoever had built this wall hadn't done professional work. Within minutes, he'd open a gap wide enough to see through. Stephen pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through darkness, illuminating a small room about 6 feet wide and 8 feet deep. There was something in the far corner, something that moved. Stephen worked the crowbar harder, pulling away chunks of concrete until the gap was large enough to squeeze through. The smell hit him first. Urine, fear, and the sour smell of a child who hadn't been bathed in days. A small boy sat huddled in the corner, blinking in the sudden light. Maybe 7 years old, thin to the point of being gaunt. His clothes were dirty and torn, and there was a metal cuff around his left ankle connected to a chain bolted to the wall. The boy looked up at Stephen with huge, terrified eyes and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Uncle Stephen?" Stephen's legs nearly gave out. He leaned against the wall to keep from falling. This couldn't be real. "Who are you?" Stephen managed to ask. "I'm Riley," the boy said. "Aunt Marlene said I had to stay down here until Grandma felt better." Stephen's mind reeled. This child knew Marlene, and he'd called Stephen Uncle, which meant Marlene had told him about the family. "How long have you been down here?" "I don't know. A long time. Aunt Marlene brings me food sometimes. She said Grandma was very sick, and I had to be quiet so she could get better." Stephen knelt in front of the boy, keeping his voice calm. "Riley, I'm going to get you out of here. I'm going to help you." Riley shook his head frantically. "No. Aunt Marlene said I have to stay. She said if I left, the bad men would come get me. She said they would hurt me and my mama." Stephen examined the metal cuff. It was secured with a small padlock. He could break it easily with the crowbar. "Riley, listen to me. Aunt Marlene was wrong. There are no bad men coming to get you. I'm going to take you upstairs and give you food and clean clothes." The boy stared at him, hope fighting against the fear that had been drilled into him. "Are you really Uncle Stephen?" "Yes, I'm really Stephen. Aunt Marlene showed me your picture. She said you were mean and you went away because you didn't love Grandma." Stephen's jaw clenched. Even in death, his mother was poisoning children's minds. "Aunt Marlene told you things that weren't true," Stephen said. "But I promise you this. I'm going to get you out of here, and I'm going to make sure you're safe." He used a crowbar to snap the padlock. Riley jumped at the sharp crack, but Stephen carefully removed the cuff, revealing raw, infected skin underneath. "Can you walk?" Riley nodded and struggled to his feet. His legs were shaky, but he could stand. Stephen picked him up. The boy weighed almost nothing and carried him out of that hellhole. In the kitchen, Stephen set Riley on a chair and got him water. The boy drank greedily, spilling half down his chin. "When did you eat last?" "Yesterday morning. Aunt Marlene brought me a sandwich." Stephen opened a can of soup and put it on the stove. While it heated, he studied Riley more carefully. Definitely malnourished, with bruises on his arms that looked like fingerprints. But his injuries weren't life-threatening. Someone had been keeping him alive, barely. "Riley, what's your mama's name?" "Lila. Lila Dean. She works at the store in town." Stephen didn't recognize the name, but he'd been gone 21 years. "Do you remember coming here? How you got to the basement?" Riley's face scrunched in concentration. "Mama brought me." She was crying. "Aunt Marlene said she would take care of me while Mama got better. But then Mama didn't come back, and Aunt Marlene said I had to go in the quiet room because Grandma was sick." The quiet room. Stephen felt rage building in his chest, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Sorry I'm late. Be there in 20 minutes. Hope you're not snooping around too much. Marlene was finally coming." Stephen looked at Riley, who was warming his hands on the soup mug. The boy's presence complicated everything. Stephen couldn't confront Marlene with Riley sitting there. The kid had been through enough. But he also couldn't let Marlene know he'd found Riley. "Not yet. Riley, I need you to do something. I need you to stay upstairs while I talk to Aunt Marlene. Can you do that?" Riley's eyes went wide with terror. "She'll be mad that I left the quiet room. She'll put me back down there." "No," Stephen said firmly. I won't let that happen. I promise you, Riley. No one is ever going to put you in that room again. The boy stared at him, then nodded slowly. Stephen led Riley upstairs to his old bedroom and gave him crackers and water. Stay here and be very quiet. If you hear voices downstairs, don't come down. No matter what you hear, don't leave this room until I come get you. Riley nodded, clutching the crackers. Stephen went back downstairs and tried to think. In 20 minutes, his sister was going to walk through that door expecting to find him cleaning their mother's house. She had no idea he'd discovered her secret. But Stephen knew, and Stephen didn't forgive. Stephen heard Marlene's car before he saw it. The same rusted Honda from high school, coughing up the driveway. She looked older than 43, dark hair streaked with gray and pulled back messily. She wore jeans and a faded sweatshirt, moving with the careful precision of someone trying not to appear drunk. Marlene knocked twice before opening the door. "Stephen? You here?" In the kitchen. She appeared in the doorway smiling that same fake smile from their mother's funeral. Marlene had always been the pretty one, the charming one. Their mother had favored her, held her up as an example of what Stephen should try to be. But Stephen had always seen through the act. "Sorry I'm late. Had to work this morning." Marlene looked around the kitchen, her eyes lingering on the basement door just a moment too long. "You've been busy. Thanks for cleaning up. Where have you been?" Stephen asked. "I told you, working. I waitress at Murphy's Diner in town." Marlene pulled out a chair and sat down. "I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I take better care of the house?" "But Stephen, you have no idea what it was like taking care of Mom these last few years. She was so sick, so demanding." Stephen stared at his sister. The lies came so easily. "Nate stopped by. He mentioned you were running some kind of daycare business." Marlene's smile faltered for just a second. "Yeah, well, I helped out some families when I could. Watched their kids while they worked. Just trying to help people." "What kind of families?" "Single mothers, mostly. Women who couldn't afford regular childcare." Her voice was getting defensive. "There's nothing wrong with helping people, Stephen. Where are these children now?" "What do you mean?" "The kids you were watching. Where are they?" Marlene stood abruptly. "Why are you interrogating me? I came here to help clean out Mom's house, not answer questions about my personal life." "Because I found something," Stephen said quietly. The color drained from Marlene's face. "What do you mean?" Stephen walked to the basement door and opened it. "I found a room, Marlene. I found Riley." For a moment, Marlene just stared. Then her face transformed, the mask falling away to reveal something cold underneath. "Where is he?" "Safe. Away from you." Marlene laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Safe? Stephen, you have no idea what you're talking about. That boy is not safe. He's never been safe. Because you chained him in a basement like an animal. Because his mother abandoned him. Because she dropped him off 6 months ago and never came back. Because there are people looking for him who will hurt him if they find him." Stephen studied his sister's face. She was telling the truth about something, but not everything. His mother's name is Lila Dean. She works at a store in town. Marlene's eyes widened. How do you never mind?" "Yes, Lila Dean. Do you know what kind of people she was involved with? Do you know why she brought Riley here? Why don't you tell me?" Marlene began pacing. Lila was in trouble. Bad trouble. She owed money to dangerous people, and they were threatening to hurt Riley if she didn't pay. So she brought him here, begged me to hide him until she could figure things out. And you thought the best place to hide him was chained in a basement. I thought the best place was somewhere no one would think to look. Mom was sick, Stephen, barely conscious most of the time. I couldn't have a kid running around making noise. What if those men came looking?" Stephen shook his head. "You're lying." "Am I? Then why hasn't Lila been back? Why hasn't she called or come looking for her son?" "Because she knows that if she does, she'll lead them right to him." "So you decided to keep him locked up forever?" "I decided to keep him alive." "You think I wanted this responsibility? You think I enjoyed taking care of a sick old woman and a traumatized kid? But somebody had to do it, Stephen. Somebody had to stay and deal with the mess while you ran off to Seattle." There it was, the real Marlene, who saw herself as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. "How many others?" Stephen asked. "What? How many other children, Marlene?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "The baby supplies in the basement. Nate said you'd been helping families for years. I told you I watch kids sometimes. And where are those kids now?" Marlene walked to the window and stared out at the brown fields. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. You don't understand what it was like after you left. Mom got worse. Much worse. She started taking in kids, said it was God's work. Stephen felt ice in his veins. What kind of kids? Ones whose families couldn't take care of them. Addicts mostly. Women too messed up to be mothers. Mom would take the kids, supposedly temporarily, while the parents got clean. Supposedly? The parents never got clean, Stephen. They disappeared, left their kids with Mom, and ran off. Or they overdosed, or got arrested, and Mom was stuck with all these children. What happened to them? Some got placed with foster families eventually. Some. Marlene's voice trailed off. Some what? Some stayed. Mom said it was temporary, just until something better came along. But years went by. Stephen thought about the strange children who had occasionally appeared at the house when he was young. His mother had always said they were relatives or neighbor kids. Where are they now? Gone. All of them. The last one left 2 years ago when Mom got really sick. Left where? I found families for them. Real families. People who wanted children. Stephen stared at his sister. What about Riley? Riley was different. His mother specifically asked me to keep him hidden. She was terrified, Stephen. Said there were people who would kill him if they found him. So you kept him chained in a basement for 6 months? I kept him safe. Do you think I enjoyed it? But what choice did I have? Stephen walked to the sink and stared out the window. Somewhere upstairs, a 7-year-old boy was waiting to find out if his nightmare was over. We need to call the police, Stephen said. No. Marlene grabbed his arm. Stephen, you can't. If you call the police, you'll be signing that boy's death warrant. The police can protect him. Can they? You've been gone too long. You don't understand how things work here anymore. Stephen turned to face her. Then explain it to me. Marlene sat down heavily. Lila Dean was involved with drug dealers. She owed them money, and when she couldn't pay, they threatened to take Riley. So she brought him here. She begged me to take him, offered me money I needed for Mom's medical bills. Said it would just be for a few weeks. But she never came back. I think they found her. I think they killed her. Stephen absorbed this. His sister sounded genuinely frightened. Even if that's true, keeping him locked up isn't the answer. Then what is? What would you do, Stephen? You're so good at judging everyone. So quick to walk away when things get complicated. The accusation hit home. Stephen had walked away from this family, built a simple life in Seattle, avoiding complications. But he couldn't walk away from this. We start by getting Riley medical attention. Then we find out what really happened to his mother. And if those men come looking, then we deal with them. Marlene laughed bitterly. We? Stephen, you don't know me anymore. You don't know what I've had to do to survive here. I know you chained a 7-year-old in a basement. And then what? You take him to Seattle? Play savior. Stephen hadn't thought that far ahead. I'll figure it out. No, you won't. Because in a week or a month, you'll get tired of the responsibility. And then you'll do what you always do, run away. I'm not running away from this. Aren't you? You ran away from home. You ran away from Mom's funeral. You spent 21 years running. I left because I had to. And what about me? What about the sister you left behind? Stephen had thought about it, more than he cared to admit. But he'd never called, never checked. He'd been too afraid of being pulled back in. I thought you could take care of yourself. I was 18, Stephen. 18, with no money, no education, and a mother who got crazier every year. The sound of footsteps upstairs made them both freeze. Is that him? Marlene asked. Stephen nodded. I want to see him. Make sure he's okay. No, you're not going near him. He's been in my care for 6 months. He trusts me. He's terrified of you. He's terrified of everything. But I've been taking care of him, keeping him fed, keeping him alive. You've been keeping him prisoner. The phone rang, the jarring sound making both jump. Stephen answered. Hello. Is this the Merritt residence? The voice was female, nervous. Yes. Is Marlene there? This is Lila Dean. I need to talk to her about my son. Stephen's blood went cold. He looked at Marlene, who had gone white. Riley's mother was alive. Stephen held the phone like it might explode, staring at Marlene as the woman's voice continued. Hello. Is anyone there? I said this is Lila Dean, and I need to speak with Marlene about Riley. Marlene lunged for the phone, but Stephen pulled it away. Ms. Dean? This is Stephen Merritt, Marlene's brother. Can you tell me where you are? I'm at the gas station on Route 2, about 10 minutes from a house. I just got back into town, and I need to see my son. Marlene said she was taking care of him while I was away. Stephen looked at Marlene, who was frantically shaking her head. Ms. Dean, I think you should come to the house. We need to talk. Is Riley okay? Is my baby okay? The desperation in the woman's voice hit Stephen hard. This was not someone who had abandoned her child. Riley is safe. Just come to the house. He hung up and turned to Marlene. You lied. Stephen, you don't understand. You told me she abandoned him. You said she never came back. She didn't. She's been gone for 6 months. Gone where? Marlene's hands were shaking. I don't know. She just left. Said she had to go away for a while, that it wasn't safe for her to stay. But she's back now. She shouldn't be. If she's back, that means... Marlene trailed off. That means what? Before Marlene could answer, footsteps came down the stairs. Riley appeared in the doorway, clutching his crackers. I heard voices. Is everything okay? Marlene saw him, and her demeanor changed completely. The fear disappeared, replaced by something that looked like maternal concern. Riley, honey, you shouldn't be down here. You know you're supposed to stay in the quiet room when there are people in the house. Riley flinched away from her. Uncle Stephen said I didn't have to go back there. He said no one was ever going to put me back there. Uncle Stephen doesn't understand the situation. He doesn't know about the bad men looking for you. Stop, Stephen said, stepping between them. Don't manipulate him. I'm not manipulating anyone. I'm trying to keep him alive. By lying to him, by making him think his mother abandoned him. His mother did abandon him. She brought him here and begged me to hide him, then disappeared for 6 months without a word. Riley looked back and forth between them, confusion and fear on his face. My mama's coming back. Stephen knelt in front of him. Yes, Riley, your mama is coming here right now. She's been looking for you. The boy's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really? But Aunt Marlene said... Riley looked at Marlene with something like betrayal. You said Mama didn't want me anymore. Marlene's composure cracked. I said that to protect you. I said that because I thought it was true. Your mama left you here and didn't come back. You were supposed to think that a mother doesn't just abandon her child, Stephen said coldly. Easy words from someone who's never had to make hard choices. They heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, Stephen could see a beat-up Ford sedan parking behind Marlene's Honda. That's her, he said. Marlene grabbed Riley's arm. Riley, listen to me. You cannot tell anyone about the quiet room, understand? If you tell people about that, the bad men will find out where you are hiding. Let go of him, Stephen said. Promise me, Riley. Promise you won't tell anyone about the basement. Riley nodded quickly, more from fear than understanding. Stephen gently pulled him away and led him to the living room. Stay here for a minute. I'll bring your mama in. Stephen opened the front door as a woman climbed the porch steps. Lila Dean was thin and pale, with dark circles under her eyes and the hollow look of someone who hadn't slept in days. Younger than Stephen expected, maybe early 30s, with blonde hair pulled back messily. Are you Stephen? Yes. And you're Riley's mother. She nodded, tears forming. Where is he? Where's my baby? He's inside. He's okay, but Ms. Dean, we need to talk first. I need to see him. Her voice was getting stronger. I need to see my son right now. Stephen stepped aside, and Lila pushed past him. She saw Riley in the living room and sobbed. Riley! The boy ran to her, and she scooped him up, crying and laughing. Stephen watched the reunion with relief and anger. This was clearly a mother who loved her child. Mama, I missed you so much, Riley said, arms wrapped around her neck. I missed you too, baby. I'm so sorry I was gone so long. Mama had to go away to keep you safe. Stephen looked at Marlene, who was watching with an unreadable expression. Ms. Dean, Stephen said, can you tell us where you've been? Lila looked up, still holding Riley. I was in Seattle. I had to leave town because some people were threatening to hurt Riley if I didn't pay them money I owed. What kind of people? Drug dealers. I made bad choices, got involved with the wrong crowd. When I couldn't pay what I owed, they said they'd take Riley and... She couldn't finish. So you brought him here. Marlene said she'd keep him safe. Said she'd take care of him until I could figure out how to handle the situation. And now the people threatening us are gone. They got arrested last month on federal charges. It's safe for me and Riley to be together again. Lila set Riley down, but kept her hand on his shoulder. Thank you, she said to Marlene. Thank you for taking care of him. Marlene finally spoke. It wasn't easy. He's a good boy, but he missed you terribly. Stephen studied his sister. She was back in control, playing the helpful caregiver. Ms. Dean, Stephen said, did Marlene tell you how she was planning to care for Riley? She said she'd keep him hidden, make sure no one knew he was here. Did she tell you she was going to keep him locked in the basement? The words exploded in the air. Lila's face went white, and she pulled Riley closer. What? Stephen, Marlene said sharply. Don't. Your son has been chained in a basement room for 6 months. Marlene built a hidden room down there and kept him locked up. That's not true, Marlene said quickly. Stephen, you're twisting the facts. But Lila was already kneeling, examining Riley's face, his arms. She pulled up his pant leg and saw the angry red mark around his ankle. Oh my God, Riley, what happened to your leg? Riley looked uncertain, glancing between his mother and Marlene. I had to wear a bracelet. Aunt Marlene said it was to keep me safe. Lila stood slowly, her face transforming with rage. You chained my son? You chained my 7-year-old son? I protected him, Marlene said, but her voice lacked conviction. I asked you to babysit him, not imprison him. You asked me to make sure no one could find him. That's exactly what I did. Lila took a step toward Marlene. You sick woman. How could you do that to a child? How could you leave your child with strangers and disappear for 6 months? How could you put him in danger in the first place? I was trying to protect him. So was I. Stop, Stephen said, but neither woman was listening. You told me you ran a daycare. You told me you were good with children. I am good with children. I kept your son safe when you couldn't. You traumatized him. Look at him. Lila gestured toward Riley, who was cowering against the wall. Look what you've done to my baby. Stephen moved to Riley and picked him up, carrying him to the front porch. Let's let the grown-ups talk. Outside, Stephen sat on the steps with Riley. The boy was trembling. It's okay. Your mama's here now. You're safe. Are they fighting about me? They're fighting about what happened to you. But it's not your fault, Riley. None of this is your fault. Through the window, Stephen could hear the argument continuing. Lila's voice getting higher. Marlene's responses more defensive. I want to go home, Riley said quietly. You will. Your mama's going to take you home. Will you come with us? The question caught Stephen off guard. I don't think so, buddy. You need to be with your mama now. But what if Aunt Marlene tries to put me back in a quiet room? Stephen felt rage building again. She's never going to put you anywhere again. I promise you that. The front door opened, and Lila came out with Marlene behind her. Lila's face was streaked with tears. We're leaving, Lila said, reaching for Riley. Come on, baby. We're going home. Ms. Dean, Stephen said, standing. Before you go, I think you should call the police. No, Marlene said quickly. Lila, you don't want to involve the police. Think about what that would mean for Riley. Lila hesitated. What do you mean? If the police get involved, there will be investigations, interviews, court hearings. Riley will have to testify. Do you really want to put him through that? Stephen couldn't believe it. She's manipulating you, Ms. Dean. She hurt your son. She committed a crime. I saved your son, Marlene said to Lila. I kept him hidden when people were trying to hurt him. Yes, the conditions weren't ideal, but he's alive and safe. Lila looked down at Riley, who was clinging to her leg. The idea of subjecting him to police interviews was clearly painful. I just want to take my son home, she said finally. That's all I want too, Marlene said. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I was just trying to help. Stephen felt like he was watching a magic trick. Somehow, Marlene was turning herself back into the victim. This isn't over, Stephen said quietly. Marlene looked at him with cold eyes. Yes, it is. Riley's going home with his mother, which is what we all wanted. Lila picked up Riley and walked toward her car. Thank you, she said to Stephen, for finding him, for calling me. Stephen wanted to say more, wanted to convince her to report what Marlene had done. But Riley had been through enough. As Stephen watched Lila drive away with her son, he made a decision. Just because Lila wasn't pressing charges didn't mean this was over. He turned to go back into the house and found Marlene watching him. "You did a good thing today," she said, reuniting a mother and child. "I found a boy chained in a basement. You found a boy who was alive and safe because I protected him." Stephen walked past her. "How many others, Marlene? We've been through this. How many other children have you protected over the years?" Marlene followed him into the kitchen. "I told you, I helped families when I could. And where are those children now? With families who could properly care for them." Stephen turned to face her. "I want names. I want to know who these families were, where the children are now." "Why? So you could disrupt their lives? So you can take children away from loving homes? So I can make sure they're actually in loving homes?" "How dare you?" Marlene whispered. "How dare you accuse me of hurting children? Then prove me wrong. Show me the paperwork. Show me something that proves these children went to good homes. I don't have to prove anything to you. You do if you want me to walk away from this." Marlene stared at him. "What do you want from me, Stephen?" "I want the truth. The truth is that I've spent 20 years cleaning up messes that other people left behind. The truth is that I've sacrificed my life to take care of children nobody else wanted." Stephen felt his patience wearing thin. "The truth is that you kept a 7-year-old boy chained in a basement for 6 months. The truth is that I kept him alive when other people wanted him dead." They stared at each other, and Stephen could see echoes of their childhood in Marlene's face. The same stubborn defiance, the same refusal to accept responsibility. "I'm not leaving this alone," Stephen said finally. "Yes, you are. Because there's nothing to pursue. Riley is back with his mother, safe and sound. That boy will have nightmares for years. That boy would be dead if not for me." Stephen realized he wasn't going to get anywhere arguing with Marlene tonight. She had an answer for everything. "I'm staying in town for a few more days to finish settling Mom's estate." "Fine. But Stephen, if you're thinking about stirring up trouble, remember that you're an outsider here now. You've been gone 20 years. People don't know you, but they know me." It was a threat, delivered with Marlene's trademark smile. "We'll see," Stephen said. Stephen spent the night on the living room couch, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had happened. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Riley's face, heard the rattle of that chain. By 6 a.m., he was dressed and drinking instant coffee, trying to figure out his next move. Marlene had left shortly after Lila and Riley, claiming she had to work an early shift. Stephen suspected she was doing damage control, getting her version of events out before Stephen could start asking questions. Stephen started with the phone book, looking up Lila Dean's address. He found her listed on Maple Street. It was early, but not too early for a concerned neighbor to check on a friend. Maple Street was in the older part of town, lined with small houses built in the 1940s. Lila's house was a tiny blue ranch with a chain-link fence. Stephen parked across the street and waited. At 7:30, Lila came out with Riley. The boy was clean, wearing fresh clothes, holding his mother's hand tightly as they walked to her car. Stephen felt relief seeing them together. After they drove away, Stephen knocked on the door. It was answered by an elderly woman with gray hair. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Lila Dean. I'm a friend of the family." "Lila's not here. She just left to take Riley to school." "School? He's going to school already. First day back. That poor boy's been through hell, but Lila thinks getting back to normal will be good for him." Stephen nodded. "I'm Stephen Merritt from out at the old farmhouse. My sister Marlene was taking care of Riley." The woman's expression changed. "Oh, you're June Merritt's son. I'm Dorothy Mills. I live next door." She gestured toward the house to the left. "I've been keeping an eye on Lila's place while she was gone." "Gone where exactly?" Dorothy looked around, then stepped closer. "Between you and me, I think she was in some kind of trouble. She came to me about 6 months ago, real nervous, said she had to go away, and asked if I'd watch the house." "Did she say what kind of trouble?" "Not exactly, but I got the impression it was man trouble. You know how it is with some young women. They get involved with the wrong type." Stephen thought about what Lila had said about owing money to drug dealers. "Did you ever see any of these men?" "A few times. Rough-looking types, driving fancy cars. They'd come by looking for her even after she left town." "Recently?" "No, not for a couple months. but they were persistent for a while. Stephen absorbed this. It seemed to confirm Lila's story about being in danger. What about Riley? Did you know Lila was leaving him with my sister? Dorothy's expression grew troubled. I knew she was making arrangements, but I didn't know the details. She said she'd found someone who could keep him safe. I offered to take him myself, but she said it had to be someone outside town. Did you ever see him during those 6 months? No, never. I asked about him when I saw Marlene in town, and she always said he was doing fine, but it was better if he stayed hidden. Stephen thanked Dorothy and walked back to his truck. The conversation had raised as many questions as it answered. If Marlene was so concerned about keeping Riley hidden, why hadn't she told Lila exactly how she planned to do it? Stephen's next stop was Murphy's Diner, where Marlene claimed to work. The diner was classic small town, red vinyl booths, and a long counter. The breakfast crowd was thinning when Stephen walked in. The waitress who approached him was young, maybe early 20s, with bleached hair and tired eyes. Coffee, please. Is Marlene Quinn working today? The waitress paused. You a friend of hers? Her brother. Oh, she relaxed. Yeah, she's here. In the back. You want me to get her? Actually, I was hoping to talk to you first. I'm Stephen Merritt. Just got back to town after my mother died. I'm Amy. Sorry about your mom. Amy refilled Stephen's cup. Marlene talks about you sometimes. Says you work on cars up in Seattle. Trucks, mostly. Amy, can I ask how long Marlene's been working here? About 3 years, maybe 4. She's a good worker, doesn't complain much. Does she work regular hours? Amy laughed. Nobody works regular hours here. We all pick up shifts when we can. But yeah, Marlene's pretty reliable. What about recently? Has she been working normal hours the past few months? Amy thought about it. Actually, she's been taking a lot of time off. Said she had to take care of your mom. Boss wasn't happy, but family's family. Stephen nodded. Did she ever mention watching kids? Running some kind of daycare? Oh, that. Yeah, she used to do that sometimes. Watch kids for people who couldn't afford regular babysitters. Good of her, really. Used to. Well, I haven't heard her mention it in a while. I think she stopped when your mom got sicker. Stephen was getting a clearer picture. Marlene had been working irregular hours, taking time off, and apparently hadn't been watching children for months before Riley arrived. Amy, did Marlene ever mention a woman named Lila Dean? Amy's expression changed, becoming guarded. Why do you ask? Lila's son was staying with Marlene while she was out of town. I'm trying to understand the situation. Look, I don't know anything about that. And even if I did, it's not really my business. The warning was clear, but it told Stephen that Amy knew more than she was saying. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I'm just worried about the kid. Amy looked around the diner, making sure no one was listening. Then she leaned closer. Look, I like Marlene, okay? She's been good to me. But there were rumors. What kind of rumors? About the kids she was watching. Some people said she was keeping them longer than she was supposed to. Some people said parents would drop their kids off and never come back. What did you think about those rumors? I thought it was none of my business. But then I heard about this one woman, Lila Dean, who brought her kid to Marlene and then disappeared. And I started wondering. Wondering what? Wondering if maybe some of those parents didn't disappear by choice. Stephen felt ice forming in his veins. What do you mean? Amy shook her head. I don't know anything for sure. It's just that this town has problems. Drug problems mostly. And sometimes people who owe the wrong people money, they just disappear. Before Stephen could ask more questions, he heard Marlene's voice from behind him. Stephen, what are you doing here? He turned to see his sister standing by the counter, wearing a food-stained apron and looking surprised. Having coffee, talking to Amy about the weather. Marlene's eyes narrowed. She could tell he was lying. Amy, can you take care of table 6? They're waiting for their check. Amy nodded and hurried away. Marlene slid into the booth across from Stephen. What are you really doing here? I told you. Having coffee. You're asking questions about me. Should I be? You should be minding your own business. Stephen studied his sister. She looked tired, stressed. Dark circles under her eyes, hands shaking slightly. Marlene, I talked to Lila's neighbor this morning. She said men were coming around looking for Lila, even after she left town. So, if Lila was really hiding from dangerous people, why didn't you take better precautions? I told you I kept him hidden. You kept him chained in a basement. That's not hidden, that's imprisoned. Marlene's voice dropped to a whisper. Stephen, you need to stop this. You need to let it go. A 7-year-old boy was chained to a wall in our mother's basement. I'm not letting that go. That boy is safe now. He's home with his mother. Isn't that what matters? Stephen leaned forward. What matters is making sure it never happens again. What matters is finding out if you've done this to other children. I haven't. Prove it. Marlene stood abruptly. I don't have to prove anything to you. You're not a cop. You're not a social worker. You're just a bitter man looking for someone to blame. My problems? You think finding that boy makes you a hero? You think it erases 20 years of running away? Stephen felt his temper rising. My responsibilities? To your family. To your mother. To me. Marlene's voice was getting louder. You left, Stephen. You walked away and never looked back. And now you want to judge me for the choices I had to make. I left because staying would have killed me. And what about me? What about what staying did to me? Stephen looked at his sister, really looked at her. She was only 43, but she looked older. Her face was lined with stress. Her body language spoke of years of carrying burdens. But that didn't excuse what she'd done to Riley. I'm sorry I left you here alone. But that doesn't change what you did. Marlene sat back down. And for a moment, she looked like the scared 18-year-old who'd watched her brother walk away. I did what I thought was right. I did what I had to do to keep that boy alive. And the others? There were no others. Not like Riley. What does that mean? Marlene was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. There were children who came to stay with Mom over the years. Kids whose parents couldn't take care of them anymore. Mom said she was helping them. And sometimes something better did come along. Nice families who wanted children. Mom would make arrangements. What arrangements? I don't know. I was just a kid myself back then. But she had connections, people who helped place children with families. Stephen felt a chill. Marlene, are you talking about illegal adoptions? I'm talking about giving children better lives, with families who paid for them. Marlene's silence was answer enough. Stephen sat back, trying to process what his sister was telling him. Their mother hadn't just been running an informal daycare. She'd been involved in child trafficking. How many? I don't know. Maybe a dozen over the years. And you helped her? I was a child myself, Stephen. I didn't understand until I was older. And by then it was too late to stop. By then it was too late to do anything except try to make sure the children were going to good homes. Stephen felt sick. And Riley was different. His mother specifically asked me to hide him, not find him a new family. But 6 months went by, and she didn't come back. She didn't come back. And I started to think maybe she wasn't coming back at all. So, you're going to sell him too? I was going to find him a family that could give him the life he deserved. Stephen stared at his sister, trying to reconcile the woman sitting across from him with the scared girl he'd left behind. Marlene, this has to stop. It already has stopped. When Mom died, it all stopped. What about the families who bought children? What about the records? There are no records. Mom was too smart for that. There has to be something. Marlene shook her head. Everything was done in cash. Everything was word of mouth. Stephen realized he was sitting across from someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of making children disappear. I don't believe you. Believe what you want. But Stephen, if you start digging into this, you're going to hurt innocent people. Families who just wanted children who have good homes now. It was another manipulation, another attempt to make Stephen feel guilty. What I want is to make sure no more children get hurt. Then walk away. Stephen dropped money on the table. I can't do that. As he walked toward the door, Marlene called after him. Stephen, if you keep pushing this, you're going to force me to protect myself. He turned back. Is that a threat? It's a warning. I've built a life here. I have friends, people who trust me. If you try to destroy that, I'll fight back. Stephen nodded slowly. Good to know where we stand. He left the diner feeling sick. Everything he'd learned was forcing him to confront a horrible truth. His family wasn't just dysfunctional, it was criminal. His mother had been selling children, and his sister had been helping her. And now Marlene was threatening him if he tried to expose the truth. Stephen spent the rest of the morning at the county courthouse, searching for any trace of his mother's adoption business. He found nothing. No business licenses, no incorporation papers, no tax records showing income from child care services. The courthouse clerk tried to help. Are you looking for something specific? My mother died recently, and I'm trying to settle her estate. There are questions about children she may have cared for. The clerk's expression grew serious. Was your mother licensed for childcare? That's what I'm trying to find out. If she was operating officially, there would be records here. State licensing, health department inspections. Stephen showed her his mother's death certificate. June Merritt. She lived at the farmhouse on Route 47. The clerk typed into her computer, then shook her head. No childcare licenses on file. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything. A lot of people do informal babysitting. What about adoption records? Those would be sealed, handled through social services. But only if they were legal adoptions. Stephen thanked the clerk and left feeling frustrated, but not surprised. If his mother had been selling children to families who couldn't adopt legally, she wouldn't have left a paper trail. His next stop was the Department of Social Services. The building was drab concrete that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Inside, Stephen found himself in a waiting room with plastic chairs and outdated magazines. The social worker who agreed to speak with him was a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Carroll Henderson. Mr. Merritt, if you're alleging your mother was involved in illegal adoptions, that's very serious. Do you have evidence? I have my sister's word that it happened. And your sister is willing to make an official statement? Stephen almost laughed. No, definitely not. Then I'm afraid there's not much we can do. Without evidence or a willing witness, we can't investigate activities that allegedly happened years ago. What about the children? Wouldn't there be missing person reports? Carol's expression grew sad. Mr. Merritt, most children who go missing in situations like you're describing aren't reported missing. They're given up by parents who can't or won't care for them. But they don't know their children are being sold. No, they probably don't. They think they're giving their children to someone who will provide care or find them good homes. They don't ask questions because they don't want to know the answers. Stephen felt sick again. So there's no way to track these children? Not without names, dates, specific information. And even then, if the adoptions were private outside the legal system. Carroll shrugged helplessly. Stephen left feeling defeated. He was starting to understand why illegal adoption rings continued to operate. They were almost impossible to prosecute after the fact. But as Stephen drove back toward the farmhouse, he realized he was approaching this wrong. He didn't need to prove his mother had been selling children 20 years ago. He needed to prove Marlene was still involved in illegal activities now. And he had a witness for that, Riley. The problem was Riley was 7, traumatized, and his mother wanted to put the experience behind them. Stephen couldn't force Lila to let her son testify, and he wouldn't want to put Riley through that anyway. But there might be another way. Stephen pulled over and called the sheriff's department, asking for Nate Carroll. Nate, it's Stephen. I need to talk to you about something important. What's going on? Can you meet me at the farmhouse? There's something I need to show you. Stephen, if this is about family drama with Marlene, it's about a crime scene. Silence. Then, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Stephen drove back to the farmhouse and waited in the kitchen. When Nate arrived in uniform, carrying a notebook, Stephen led him to the basement and showed him the hidden room where Riley had been kept. Nate's expression grew serious as he examined the broken chain, the metal cuff, the makeshift toilet in the corner. Jesus Christ. How long was the kid down here? 6 months, according to Marlene. Nate took pictures with his phone and made notes. This is definitely child abuse. Probably false imprisonment, too. Where's the boy now? Home with his mother. They left yesterday. And Marlene, she claimed she was protecting him from dangerous people. Nate examined the lock Stephen had broken. Protection doesn't usually involve chains and padlocks. That's what I told her. Stephen, I'm going to need you to make an official statement about what you found. And I'm going to need to talk to the boy and his mother. Stephen felt relief. Finally, someone in authority was taking this seriously. There's more. Marlene told me our mother was involved in illegal adoptions, taking children from parents who couldn't care for them and selling them to families who couldn't adopt legally. Nate's expression grew grim. Do you have proof? Just Marlene's word. But Nate, she admitted it. Would she make an official statement? Not a chance. Nate closed his notebook. Stephen, I'm going to be honest. The child abuse charge, we might be able to make stick. The illegal adoption allegations. That can be much harder to prove. But you'll investigate? I'll do what I can. But I have to warn you, Marlene has friends in this town. People like her, trust her. They're going to have a hard time believing she could do something like this. Stephen thought about Amy's warnings at the diner. Are you one of those people, Nate? Nate met his eyes. I'm a cop first, Stephen. If Marlene committed crimes, I'll arrest her. But I'm also your friend, and I'm telling you this is going to get ugly. I'm prepared. But as they climbed the basement stairs, Stephen wondered if that was really true. He'd been away from this town for 20 years. He didn't know who Marlene's friends were, or how much influence she had. He was about to find out. That evening, Stephen was heating soup when his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Stephen Merritt? The voice was male, official. Yes. This is Deputy Chief Marcus Webb. I think we need to have a conversation. Stephen didn't recognize the name. About what? About allegations you've been making around town. Allegations that could hurt a lot of good people. The threat was clear. Stephen felt his heart rate increase. I haven't made any allegations. I reported a crime. You've been asking questions about things that are none of your business. Stirring up trouble for a woman who's done nothing but help this community. Help the community? She kept a child chained in a basement. According to you. But Deputy Carroll tells me there's no evidence of abuse. Just a disagreement about child care arrangements. Stephen felt ice in his veins. What did you say? I said there's no evidence of any crime. The child in question is back with his mother, safe and sound. No harm done. No harm? That boy was chained to a wall for 6 months. That boy was being protected from people who wanted to hurt him. His mother dropped him off voluntarily and picked him up when it was safe. End of story. Stephen realized what was happening. You're covering this up. I'm preventing a misunderstanding from becoming a public relations nightmare. Stephen, you've been gone from this town for 20 years. You don't know how things work here anymore. I know right from wrong. Do you? Because what I see is a bitter man trying to cause trouble for his sister because he feels guilty about abandoning his family. The psychological manipulation was expert, designed to make Stephen doubt himself. Deputy Chief Webb, are you telling me you're not going to investigate what I found? I'm telling you there's nothing to investigate. And I'm suggesting that you might want to finish your business here and head back to Seattle before you make things worse for everyone. And if I don't, then you might find that life in a small town can be very difficult for people who don't understand how to get along. The line went dead. Stephen stared at his phone, trying to process what had just happened. Nate had promised to investigate, but somehow his report had been buried. Marlene's influence reached higher than Stephen had thought. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You should have listened. Now, things get complicated. Stephen looked out the kitchen window at the darkness beyond. Somewhere out there, Marlene was calling in favors, mobilizing allies. The system really was on her side. But Stephen had made a promise to a 7-year-old boy in a basement. And Stephen didn't forgive, even if it meant taking on the entire town. 3 days had passed since Deputy Chief Webb's warning call, and Stephen had spent them carefully planning his next move. The official investigation had been killed, just as Marlene had predicted. But Stephen had learned something important during his years as a mechanic. When the standard tools didn't work, you improvised. Stephen sat in his truck outside Murphy's diner, watching Marlene finish her shift. Since Webb's call, Stephen had been more careful about who he talked to and what questions he asked. But he'd still been gathering information, just more quietly. The most important thing he'd learned was that Marlene's protection wasn't absolute. Her boyfriend, City Councilman David Park, had influence in local politics and law enforcement. But there were other authorities who might be interested in what Stephen had discovered. State authorities, federal authorities, people who didn't answer to small-town politics. But first, Stephen needed more evidence than just Riley's testimony and his own eyewitness account. He needed Marlene to confess, on the record, to what she'd been doing. Stephen waited until Marlene came out of the diner and started walking to her car. Then he called her cell phone. Stephen, what do you want? To make a deal. Silence. Then what kind of deal? Meet me at the farmhouse tomorrow evening. Come alone. We'll settle this once and for all. Settle what? Mom's estate. The property. Everything. You want to sell? I want to get out of this town and never come back. But I need to know that certain things are going to stay buried. Stephen could almost hear Marlene thinking, trying to figure out if this was a trap. What's the catch? No catch. I just want this over with. And if I don't believe you, then we can keep fighting and we'll both lose. Your choice. Marlene was quiet for a long moment. Tomorrow evening? 7 o'clock. Fine. But Stephen, if this is some kind of trick. It's not a trick. It's a conversation we should have had 20 years ago. Stephen hung up and drove back to the farmhouse. He had 24 hours to prepare, and he was going to need every minute. The first thing he did was call Nate, but not on his official phone. Stephen had gotten Nate's personal cell number years ago, back when they were still friends. Stephen, I can't talk to you about this case. Webb made that clear. I'm not calling about the case. I'm calling because I need a favor. As a friend. What kind of favor? Stephen explained his plan. Nate wasn't happy about it. Stephen, this is a bad idea. If Marlene is as dangerous as you think, you shouldn't be meeting with her alone. I won't be alone. You'll be there, hidden in the basement, listening to a conversation that probably won't be admissible in court, even if she confesses. Do you have a better idea? Nate sighed. What if she brings backup? What if this David Park shows up? Then you arrest them for trespassing. Stephen, Webb specifically ordered me to stay away from this. Webb doesn't have to know. This is between you and me. Stephen could hear Nate struggling with his conscience. Finally, if I do this, it's off the books. No official report. No arrest unless she actually confesses to a felony. Understood. And if this goes sideways, I was never here. Agreed. Nate reluctantly agreed to help with conditions. He would hide in the basement before Marlene arrived. Stephen would wear a wire to record the conversation. And at the first sign of trouble, Nate would intervene. The next step was setting up the recording equipment. Nate brought a digital recorder and a small wireless microphone that Stephen could hide under his shirt. They tested it several times to make sure the audio quality was clear. Remember, Nate said, you need to get her to talk about specific children. Names, dates, what happened to them. General admissions won't be enough. I understand. And Stephen, don't push too hard. If she gets suspicious, she'll shut down completely. Stephen nodded, but privately he was planning to push as hard as necessary. This might be his only chance to get the truth. That evening, Stephen walked through the house one final time, making sure everything was ready. He'd cleaned the kitchen and living room, making the space look normal. The basement door was closed, hiding Nate's presence downstairs. At 6:50, Stephen heard a car coming up the driveway. Through the window, he saw Marlene's Honda pulling up to the house. She was alone, just as she'd promised. Stephen's phone buzzed with a text from Nate. She's here. Recording started. Be careful. Stephen opened the front door before Marlene could knock. She looked nervous, glancing around the property as if checking for signs of a trap. You came, Stephen said. I said I would. Marlene stepped inside and looked around the living room. So what's this deal you want to make? Sit down. We need to talk. They moved to the kitchen, where Stephen had placed chairs around the table. Marlene sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I want to sell the property and split the proceeds 50-50, Stephen said. Clean slate, fresh start. In exchange, I forget about Riley. I forget about the basement. I go back to Seattle and never mention your name again. Marlene studied his face, looking for signs of deception. Why the sudden change of heart? Because I realized you were right. I can't prove anything that happened years ago. And putting Riley through a court case wouldn't help anyone. What about your conscience? What about making sure no more children get hurt? Stephen shrugged. Not my problem anymore. Marlene leaned back in her chair. I don't believe you. You don't have to believe me. You just have to decide if you want to keep fighting a battle you can't win. Can't win? Stephen, you're the one with no evidence and no witnesses. Deputy Chief Webb made it clear that your allegations are going nowhere. Stephen had expected this. Webb bought you some time, but he can't protect you forever. Eventually, someone's going to start asking questions about those children who disappeared over the years. What children? The ones you and Mom sold to families who couldn't adopt legally. Marlene's face went pale. I never said anything about selling children. You didn't have to. I figured it out myself. Stephen leaned forward. The question is, how many others are going to figure it out? How many other families are going to come looking for their missing children? There are no missing children, aren't there? What about the parents who brought their kids to mom for temporary care and never saw them again? What about the ones who came back looking for their children and were told they'd been placed with other families? Marlene was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. You don't understand what those children's lives were like before they came to us. Stephen felt his pulse quicken. She was starting to talk. Tell me about them. They were living in hell, Stephen. Addicts for parents, no food, no supervision, no love. We gave them better lives. By selling them? By finding them families who could provide what they needed. For a price. The fees covered expenses. Medical care, clothing, food while they stayed with us. Stephen kept his voice calm, encouraging. How much did the families pay? It depended on the situation. Younger children, healthy children, cost more to place. How much, Marlene? 20,000. Sometimes 30 for infants. Stephen felt sick, but he kept his expression neutral. That's a lot of money. It was a lot of responsibility. Do you know what it's like to care for traumatized children? To find them suitable homes. How did you find the families? Word of mouth, mostly. People knew that Mom helped children find homes. Couples who couldn't adopt through agencies would come to us. Couples who couldn't pass background checks. Marlene's eyes flashed with anger. Couples who were being discriminated against by bureaucrats. Good people who would have been wonderful parents if given the chance. Stephen was getting everything on tape, but he needed more specifics. Tell me about one of them. One of the children. Marlene hesitated. Why? Because I want to understand. I want to know that these children really did go to good homes. Marlene stared at the table for a long moment. There was a little girl named Emma, 3 years old when she came to us. Her mother was a prostitute, strung out on heroin. The child was malnourished, covered in bruises. What happened to her? We placed her with a family in Montana, a rancher and his wife who'd been trying to have children for years. They loved her, gave her everything she could want. How do you know? Because they sent pictures, updates, until she was old enough that it wasn't safe anymore. Safe. Safe for them to maintain contact. The adoption had to look completely legal. Stephen felt like he was looking into an abyss. How many children, Marlene? How many did you and Mom place over the years? I don't know exactly. Maybe 20. Maybe more. And their birth parents? Most of them never came back. They were relieved to have someone else take responsibility. And the ones who did come back? Marlene's face went hard. They were told their children had been placed with licensed foster families, that they couldn't have contact without going through official channels. Did any of them pursue it through official channels? A few tried, but there were no official records. Their children had been placed privately. Stephen leaned forward. What happened to the parents who kept pushing, who wouldn't accept that their children were gone? Marlene didn't answer. What happened to them, Marlene? Sometimes people just leave town, start over somewhere else. And sometimes they have accidents. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Stephen felt the wire under his shirt and hoped it was picking up every word clearly. What kind of accidents? Car accidents, mostly. Rural roads can be dangerous, especially at night. Who arranged these accidents? I didn't arrange anything. I just knew people who could solve problems. What people? Marlene looked directly at Stephen. The kind of people who understand that some things are more important than individual lives. Stephen felt cold despite the warm room. How many parents died, Marlene? I don't know. I didn't keep count. Guess. Maybe 5. Maybe 6. Stephen stared at his sister, trying to process what she was telling him. She wasn't just involved in child trafficking. She was involved in murder. And Riley was supposed to be temporary. His mother was supposed to come back. But she didn't. No, she didn't. So you were going to sell him too. I was going to find him a family that could give him the life he deserved. For how much? 40,000. He was young, healthy, smart. Premium placement. Stephen felt rage building in his chest. His mother came back yesterday. She's been looking for him for 6 months. I know that now. You lied to me. You said she was dead. I thought she was dead. When parents disappear for that long, they usually don't come back. Because you have them killed. Marlene's composure finally cracked. I don't have anyone killed. I just know people who solve problems when problems need solving. The same people who solve problems for Mom. Yes. The same people who would solve problems for you if I became a problem. Marlene looked at Stephen with something that might have been regret. I don't want you to become a problem, Stephen. But if I do, then you'd be handled like any other problem. Stephen had heard enough. He had a full confession on tape, including admissions of murder and conspiracy. More than enough to destroy Marlene and everyone involved with her operation. I have one more question, Stephen said. What? How do you sleep at night? Marlene smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Very well, actually, because I know that every child we placed is living a better life than they would have had otherwise. Even if their parents are dead. Especially because their parents are dead. Stephen stood up from the table. I think we're done here. So we have a deal. We have something. But it's not a deal. Marlene's expression changed as she realized something was wrong. What do you mean? Stephen walked over to the basement door and opened it. You can come up now, Nate. Footsteps on the stairs. Marlene's face went white as Nate appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hand resting on his service weapon. Marlene Quinn, Nate said quietly. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, child trafficking, and about a dozen other felonies. Marlene looked back and forth between Stephen and Nate, understanding finally dawning on her face. You recorded me. Every word, Stephen said. That's illegal. I didn't consent to being recorded. Actually, Nate said, pulling out his handcuffs, Washington is a one-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation knows about the recording, it's legal. Marlene stood up slowly, her hands shaking. Stephen, you don't understand what you've done. I understand perfectly. Those people I told you about, the ones who solve problems, they're not going to just disappear because you arrested me. Then we'll deal with them too. Nate moved behind Marlene to cuff her hands. You have the right to remain silent. As Nate read Marlene her rights, Stephen walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the darkness. Somewhere out there were the graves of parents who died for trying to find their children. Somewhere out there were children who'd been stolen from their families and sold to the highest bidder. But Marlene was in custody now, and with her confession, they could start unraveling the entire network. Stephen had kept his promise to Riley. No one would ever be chained in the quiet room again. As Nate finished reading Marlene her rights, Stephen's phone rang. Unknown number. Don't answer it, Nate said quickly. But Stephen had already hit the accept button. Hello, Stephen Merritt? The voice was different from Webb's call, but equally threatening. Yes, this is David Park. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Stephen looked at Marlene, who had gone even paler. Her boyfriend, the city councilman. No misunderstanding. Your girlfriend just confessed to trafficking children and conspiracy to commit murder. Stephen, you need to think very carefully about what you're doing. Marlene has been under a lot of stress since your mother died. She's been saying things that aren't true. Everything she said was true, and it's all on tape. There was a pause. Stephen, you don't understand the situation you're walking into. There are a lot of important people involved in this. People who won't appreciate having their private business exposed. Then they shouldn't have gotten involved in child trafficking. What they got involved in was helping children find better homes. Helping families who couldn't navigate the bureaucratic adoption process. Nothing illegal about that. Murder is illegal. No one was murdered, Stephen. People sometimes leave town when their lives get complicated. That's not murder. Stephen looked at Nate, who was listening to the conversation with growing alarm. David, I'm hanging up now. If you want to discuss this further, you can call my lawyer. Stephen, wait. Let me ask you something. Do you really want to destroy the lives of 20 children who are living happily with families who love them? Do you want to tear those families apart for the sake of your personal vendetta against your sister? It was the same manipulation Marlene had tried, but coming from a politician, it sounded smoother. Those children were stolen from their birth parents. Those children were saved from lives of abuse and neglect. But if you insist on pursuing this, those children will be taken from the only families they've ever known and put into the foster care system. Is that really what you want? Stephen felt a moment of doubt. Was he doing the right thing? Would exposing the truth really help the children who'd been trafficked? Then he thought about Riley, chained in that basement for 6 months. He thought about the parents who'd been murdered for trying to find their children. David, those children deserve to know the truth about where they came from. and the people responsible for trafficking them deserve to go to prison. Stephen, you're making a very big mistake. The mistake was made 20 years ago when this operation started. Stephen hung up and looked at Nate. How long before they try to interfere with the arrest? Not long. We need to get Marlene to the county jail, not the local lockup. Because the local cops are compromised? Because David Park has friends in the local department. Nate called for backup from state police, explaining that he had a suspect in custody for federal crimes and needed secure transport. While they waited, Stephen sat across from Marlene at the kitchen table. Regrets? He asked. About what? About any of it. The children you sold, the parents who died. Marlene looked at him with something that might have been pity. My only regret is that you're too stupid to understand what we accomplished. Enlighten me. We saved children, Stephen. We took kids from situations where they were being abused, neglected, or worse, and we gave them to families who desperately wanted to love them. For money. The money wasn't the point. The money just made it possible to continue helping more children. Stephen shook his head. You convinced yourself that trafficking children was a humanitarian mission. It was a humanitarian mission. Do you know what happens to children in the foster care system? Do you know how many of them age out without ever finding permanent homes? So you decided to bypass the system entirely. I decided to do what the system couldn't do. Match children who needed homes with families who could provide them. Nate looked up from his phone. State police are 15 minutes out. Marlene turned to Stephen with a last desperate appeal. Stephen, it's not too late. You can call this off. Tell them I was just rambling, that I didn't mean any of it. Why would I do that? Because I'm your sister. Because I'm the only family you have left. You stopped being my family the moment you chained a child in a basement. That child is safe now. He's home with his mother. No thanks to you. Thanks to me. If I hadn't hidden him, he'd be dead. Stephen studied his sister's face. Even now, even with handcuffs on her wrists and facing life in prison, she couldn't admit she'd done anything wrong. Marlene, do you remember when we were kids? When Mom would lock me in the basement for hours. That was different. How was it different? You were being punished. Riley was being protected. Riley was 7 years old, chained to a wall in a concrete room. How is that different from what Mom did to me? Because I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. You chose to become just like her. Marlene's face crumpled, and for a moment, she looked like the 18-year-old girl Stephen had left behind. I try to be different, she whispered. I try to be better than her. By selling children? By helping them. By giving them chances they never would have had otherwise. Stephen heard cars pulling into the driveway. Through the window, he could see state police vehicles with their red and blue lights flashing. The children you helped are going to grow up wondering why they don't look like their parents, Stephen said. They're going to have questions about their medical history, their genetic background, and some of them are going to start looking for answers. Let them look. They won't find anything. They'll find me, and I'll tell them the truth about where they came from. Marlene's eyes widened. You wouldn't. I would. Every single one of them deserves to know the truth. The front door opened, and 2 state troopers entered the kitchen. Nate showed them his badge and explained the situation. We'll transport her to the county facility, one of the troopers said. FBI is already en route to take over the investigation. As the troopers led Marlene toward the door, she turned back to Stephen one last time. Stephen, those people David warned you about, they're not going to forget about this. Let them come. They will come. And when they do, you'll wish you'd minded your own business. My business is making sure children like Riley never get hurt again. Marlene laughed bitterly. You think this is over? You think arresting me is going to end anything? It's a start. It's a death sentence. For both of us. The troopers led her out of the house and into their patrol car. Stephen watched through the window as they drove away, taking his sister to a jail cell where she would spend the rest of her life. Nate sat down at the kitchen table. You okay? I'm fine. Stephen, what Marlene said about people coming after you, she might not be wrong. I know. The FBI will offer you protection if you want it. Stephen thought about it for a moment. I've been running from this family my whole life. I'm not running anymore. What about Seattle? Your job. I'll figure it out. Nate nodded slowly. So what now? Stephen looked around the kitchen where he'd eaten countless miserable meals as a child. The same room where his mother had plotted to sell children. The same room where his sister had just confessed to 20 years of crimes. Now we make sure every child finds their way home. The FBI investigation took 6 months. Stephen testified before 3 different grand juries, told his story to dozens of federal agents, and watched as the network his mother had built was systematically dismantled. David Park was arrested 2 weeks after Marlene. His city council position and political connections couldn't protect him from federal kidnapping and conspiracy charges. 3 other local officials were indicted, along with 2 lawyers who had created false documentation for the illegal adoptions. The hardest part was contacting the families who had unknowingly bought trafficked children. FBI agents visited 23 homes across 7 states, breaking the news to parents who thought their adoptions had been legitimate. Some of the children were returned to surviving birth relatives. Others remained with their adoptive families when no birth relatives could be found and the children expressed a preference to stay. Riley's story had a different ending. Lila Dean sued the county for failing to investigate her son's disappearance and won a settlement that ensured Riley would be financially secure for the rest of his life. She also started a foundation to help other families reunite with missing children. Stephen attended Marlene's sentencing hearing on a cold March morning in federal court. She received 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As the judge read the verdict, Marlene turned to look at Stephen one last time. Her face was blank, empty of the charm and manipulation that had defined her for so long. "Do you have anything to say to the court?" the judge asked. Marlene stood slowly. "I help children find better lives. History will vindicate me." Even now, even facing life in prison, she couldn't admit she'd done anything wrong. After the hearing, Stephen drove back to the farmhouse for the last time. The property had been seized by the federal government as evidence, but they'd given him permission to retrieve a few personal items before it was demolished. He walked through the empty rooms, remembering the scared 17-year-old who'd climbed out a bedroom window to escape this place. The house felt smaller now, less threatening. Just a collection of rotting boards and bad memories. In the basement, Stephen stood in the doorway of the room where Riley had been kept. The FBI had removed the chain and cuff as evidence, but the bullet holes in the concrete wall remained. Someone had spray-painted "Never Again" on the wall in red letters. Stephen thought about the other children who had passed through this house over the years. Some had been reunited with birth families. Others had chosen to stay with the adoptive families who'd raised them. All of them now knew the truth about where they'd come from. Not all truths were comfortable, but Stephen believed people deserved to know where they came from, even if the truth was painful. He climbed the basement stairs one last time and locked the door behind him. In a few weeks, a demolition crew would tear down the house and fill in the basement. The physical evidence of what had happened here would be erased, but the memories would remain. Outside, Stephen loaded the last box of papers into his truck. He'd found his mother's journals hidden in the attic, documenting 20 years of illegal adoptions. The FBI had copies, but Stephen was keeping the originals. Someday, when the trafficked children were adults, they might want to know the details of their stories. As Stephen drove away from the farmhouse, he called Lila Dean to check on Riley. The boy was doing well in therapy, back in school, making friends. The nightmares were becoming less frequent. "He asks about you sometimes," Lila said. "He wants to know if you're okay. Tell him I'm fine. Tell him I kept my promise." "What promise?" "He'll know." Stephen drove to the cemetery where his mother was buried. June Merritt's headstone was simple black granite with her name and dates. No flowery inscription about being a beloved mother or faithful servant. Just the basic facts of her existence. Stephen stood at the grave for a few minutes, not to pay respects, but to confirm that she was really dead, that her reign of terror was finally over. "I hope you rot in hell," he said quietly, repeating the last words he'd spoken to her in life. Then he got back in his truck and drove towards Seattle, leaving Spokane and all its ghosts behind forever. Stephen never remarried, never had children of his own. He went back to fixing diesel engines and living a quiet life. But every Christmas, he sent a card to Riley Dean in care of his mother. The cards always contained the same message: "Still keeping my promise." Uncle Stephen. And he did keep his promise. No child was ever chained in a basement on the Merritt property again, because there was no Merritt property. The land was turned into a memorial park for missing children, with a playground where the farmhouse had once stood. Sometimes Stephen would get letters from the children who'd been trafficked by his family's operation. Some wanted to thank him for exposing the truth. Others wanted to condemn him for destroying the only families they'd ever known. Stephen answered every letter because he believed everyone deserved to have their voice heard. He kept his mother's journals in a safety deposit box in Seattle, along with a key to the memorial park. In his will, Stephen left instructions that both should be given to Riley Dean when he turned 18. If anyone deserved to carry on the work of helping missing children find their way home, it was the boy who'd been chained in the basement, but never lost hope that someone would come save him. On quiet nights, Stephen would take out the small wooden race car that Riley had made for him in art class and remember the promise he'd kept. No child would ever be lost in the darkness again, not if Stephen Merritt had anything to say about it. The basement was empty now. The quiet room was silent forever. And that was exactly the way Stephen wanted it. Stephen never looked back at Spokane again. But he never forgot the promise he'd made to a 7-year-old boy in a basement, and he never stopped working to make sure no child would ever be lost in the darkness like that again. The Merritt family legacy ended with Stephen, and that was the greatest victory of all.